Good evening and welcome. I'm Rose Kratzley, the co-chair of the DEI Commission. And thank you for joining us for our second annual DEI Candidates Forum here in the town of Concord. We are very grateful to our candidates for stepping forward to serve, to our beloved moderator, Dr. Carlos Hoyt, and for guiding this evening's conversation, Magnolia Begley, our town liaison, Donna McIntosh for getting the word out, Arkady and the Minuteman media team, and to everyone who helped make this evening possible. This forum matters because local leadership helps shape whether people feel seen, safe, secure, and respected, and able to fully participate in community life. Tonight is an opportunity to come together in the spirit of dignity, belonging, and shared responsibility as we continue building a Concord where everyone can thrive and where we all feel a sense of pride to call Concord home. Thank you for being here. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Joe Palumbo, who will be introducing our moderator for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. What makes a forum and go well is a conversation. And we felt very fortunate that we were able to get Dr. Carlos Hoyt to come with us tonight to really help all of us and as leaders in the community have a conversation about how we really build a welcoming Concord. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Hoyt. Dr. Hoyt is an author, he's a teacher, he's a facilitator, and he works with organizations and schools and towns and businesses and communities to really have these conversations in a way that allow us to be who we really are, to be vulnerable, and figure out how working together we can grow. So I'd like to introduce our colleague and friend, Dr. Hoyt.
This okay? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah, I have a very quiet voice, so we'll see what happens. I should, full disclosure, I'm also a psychotherapist. I'll tell you all what I think of you later, just in terms of that stuff. I am so pleased and proud to be able to be here on two levels. One, to support the aspirations of this town that I've been fortunate to be able to do for a while now. I actually love the people that I've gotten to work with here, and I've been so admiring of the work that folks here are trying to do. Because it includes facing down frustrations and things that don't go well, and looking at the gaps that we have and not being discouraged. And I actually think that's essential, to trying to make change in the ways that we're talking about here. So I was happy when Joe called to say, could you possibly? Yes, if I can do it, I will do it, because I believe in the work you do here, and I'll do whatever I can to support it. I'm actually a DEI person. I don't know how that lands when I say that. So I'm a psychotherapist who does a lot of educational consultation and a lot of work in what we call, the DEI sphere. But I'm not actually here to talk about my views on DEI tonight. It's not time for me to pontificate. It's time to try to, give everybody up here a chance to say how their work, might run through, involve, be inspired by, informed by this thing we call DEI, and how that will translate to them being of service to all of you. I will walk through in a moment, the format for tonight, but I want to say that by 6:45-ish, if I haven't stopped, asking my questions, I will stop hard and make sure that everybody here has a chance to ask questions that are probably most important to you if I don't actually hit on them. So that's sort of a very high-level overview. In terms of actual sort of structure, here's what we have in mind. Would love to give each of you 2-3 minutes, just sort of opening stuff, personal information that you want to share, motivation to lead in the area you want to lead in, and how you understand the job description and importance of the role that you're going to fill or seek to fill. Then I actually want to spend some time giving you a chance to talk about your relationship to this thing we call DEI. Because goodness knows it's talked about a lot, but I not just worry, I observe that people aren't always talking about the same thing when they talk about DEI. So it's not a quiz, it's not a gotcha. After you speak, I'm not going to say you got that wrong, but it's an opportunity for you to, I hope, with some humility, if that's appropriate, talk about what you see it as, and we'll talk about some more of that stuff in a moment. So there'll be a few rounds on that. Let's call it principles, processes, and practices around DEI. How I understand DEI, and I'm speaking for you. My process of learning about DEI, regarding best understanding and practices, the depth, the breadth, and sources of my room for growth. I want to talk about allyship, and I'll explain that because I don't expect everybody in the room to understand what that sort of jargon means. Give you a chance to talk about cooperation and coordination across sources of leadership. And then sort of shift to what might be called part two, some challenges we're facing. Question about hate crimes and accountability. Give you a chance to talk about achievement gaps. Future of MCI Concord and economic exclusion. Municipal efficiency and digital divide. And what to keep doing in a town like ours where there are many symbols, that cause many people to feel that, well, should that be up? Should that not be up? What should the name of this thing be? What should the name of that be? And give you a chance to really say where you land on some of that. Then I do want to shift to giving the citizens here a chance to engage with you. I encourage you to talk with each other. If somebody makes a remark about something and you want to speak to that in some way, please do. Also, any question that I ask, anybody can answer. I'm not going to say this is only a question for the folks who are seeking to be on the select board. I do appreciate the need for boundedness in the spheres that we work, but I also believe that there's always going to be cross-hatching, intersectionality, and that every citizen in town sort of stands at the intersection, of everything that you all do. So what does it mean for you all to do work in a way that isn't siloed? So in that spirit, feel free. Not because you think you know better than the person who's in that role, but you are, after all, a citizen, and you want to be a leader, and it's fine to just speak to whatever you'd like to. Any questions about that?
Is it okay if we ask each other questions in the course of the conversation?
If it's related to the topic that we're on, yes.
Okay.
But it would be, I think, hard in terms of the agenda if we add a new topic altogether.
Perfect.
Okay. That makes sense?
Perfect sense.
Okay, great. Thanks for asking. All right. Let's begin then by giving each one, just right down the table, a chance to introduce yourself. Again, anything in terms of personal information you want to share, and then what motivates you to be seeking the role you are.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you to the Commission. Thanks for the folks who are in the room here with us and also on the Zoom call. Great privilege to be part of this race and part of this community and part of this debate tonight. I'll talk a little bit about my background, and I will say up front that I think it's worth noting that it's nobody's idea of a good time, at least for the select board race, for there to be only two white men here talking about these issues. But what that really leads us to is that you've got to decide for yourself on the merits who will carry what we're talking about here into leadership in town and do the things that we want to do to make this a more welcoming and vibrant community. So it's often the case that politicians will try to hide from their record, but in this case, I'm definitely not going to hide from mine. I grew up in the Midwest in a big, tight-knit family, a Jewish family in a very small community of Jews in Kansas City. I'm only a generation removed from people who had to change their names to be accepted in a community like that, and I went through a lot as a kid that it took me years to sort of understand in that sense, and I don't think that means that I can understand everybody's different experience and particularly what's going on here in town, but I have been in that position of feeling uncomfortable in a place where you want to call home and where you want to be part of a community and a conversation. So in terms of the course of my life, in addition to being privileged growing up, the greatest privilege of my life is that I've been able to lead a life of service, both personally and professionally. My grandparents were a very big influence on my life. My grandfather was involved in our community. My grandmother was a naturalist. I grew up at both of their knees. And they demanded from very early on that two things needed to be true. You needed to focus on your education, and you needed to give back to your community. Wherever you went in life, that's what you needed to do. And it took me a little while, maybe after college, to know how deeply ingrained in me that had become. But when I entered the professional world, I've really had this life of service with no detours. And that's something that I feel very proud about. And it's something that is different in terms of people that are in my peer group or that I went to college with. And that really is just who I am. So I started out in the professional world working on labor and human rights in corporate supply chains, trying to help corporations take those issues more seriously, particularly in Latin America. I moved from there to build a business unit inside a consulting firm that was focused on development and global health. When I moved to the Boston area in around 2014, I joined an organization that was very focused on bringing resources to entrepreneurs who were shut out of philanthropy because of who they were, because of where they came from, because of many things. And that was an experience that allowed me to be deeply trained in DEI, and I'm excited to talk about what that has meant for me. It's also allowed me to be in proximity to people who have such different experiences than I've had. Entrepreneurs who were formerly incarcerated, entrepreneurs from rural areas.
10 seconds, yeah.
10 seconds. So that really is deeply ingrained in me, and it's part of all of what I talk about when I say I want there to be a more vibrant and welcoming Concord, and I know we'll have time to talk a little bit about that soon. The last thing I'll quickly say is my job now is to work across the country to help citizens, our fellow citizens, and our young people develop civic virtue, and that I think is something that is incredibly relevant also to the conversation we're about to have here today. So thank you very much.
Thanks for getting us started. Please.
Thank you. Stefan Bader. As you all know, I'm running for a second term on the Housing Authority Board. I have a slightly different history of how I got here. I also grew up in a diverse neighborhood in New York where there was a mixture of various nationalities and faiths. My Boy Scout group met in the local Jewish center. There was a Catholic school across the street from my elementary school. And I remember coming home one day from school as kindergarten, first grade, and saying to my mother, "What am I?" And she was trying to figure out what did I mean. And I said, well, these kids are saying they're Jewish or they're Catholic or whatever, what am I? And that started a long conversation. The short answer is agnostic, but the longer answer is how do we classify ourselves? How does that come to be a part of our core being? And we could expand on that for a long time. Suffice it to say that for purposes of this discussion, I think I had the opportunity to travel around the world and to actually live in Germany for 6 months, and that has exposed me to communities and places that are not Concord, not Massachusetts, not even the USA. And when you've seen how people live in other countries, and when you've lived that life, you come at the rest of your life, I think, with a broader willingness to accept that you don't always have the right answers or the only answers. There may be other approaches. I have found people and foods and everything interesting. I'm always going for the diversity of something different because that makes my life richer. And that's kind of my philosophy. That doesn't address everything, but I'm also thinking back as I'm sitting here reflecting on other situations where I felt either like I belonged in the room or like I didn't belong in the room. And through college and my first jobs, I was working with mostly other white middle-class people. And you see everybody on the subway in Boston, but you're not interacting with everybody on the subway necessarily.
Like 15 seconds.
And different workplaces that I've worked in have had different compositions of varying degrees of ethnicity that has also expanded my mind. So I in summary, I guess I figure if I can eat any kind of food and travel anywhere in the world, I can probably work with anybody, and let's get to know each other.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.
Carlin, please.
I'm Carlin Reed, and I'm running for town moderator. My background is different from everybody here, and what I'm doing is different from everybody here as far as on this panel, because I'm from Montana, where diversity was, are you Swedish, Norwegian, or Icelandic? And I happen to be all three, and that to me was the racial diversity in our town. So DEI, I'm still on that learning curve. I really am learning a lot about it, even at this age. But in the role of town moderator, my job is to not look at the issues, not so much as to make sure that the people who want to talk about the issues can do so in a comfortable environment, have a fair chance, and that I, as the moderator, act in a partial, fair, and complete manner to allow those communications to occur. So that's really my job, is the process, not the issues. But I'm willing to answer any questions that you have of me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity that the DEI Commission has given us to, to talk to all of you. Like some of the folks down the row here, I grew up in a community that was really, really not very diverse. However, my mother grew up in Queens, and when she got out of Queens and ended up in New Canaan, Connecticut, which was about as lily white as it gets, she wanted to give back, and she taught us to give back. We had kids come out on the Fresh Air Fund, which used to be run by the New York Herald Tribune. We had a student teacher come out from City College and stay with us for a whole semester while she was teaching in the elementary school to get her practical education. So my family had a feeling all within it, right there, then and there, that diversity was important, that reaching across, giving back, and doing what you can is important. That, interestingly, turned into a career where my very first boss ran and was on the board of a house in New Canaan called the ABC House, which gave underprivileged kids a chance to live in that house and go to our high school, which was extremely well resourced. And they needed monitoring, they needed oversight, and I was able to help in that house to provide some oversight there. So I have some experience with trying to help and trying to get involved with areas where a very not diverse community could use some help becoming a little bit more diverse and giving those the opportunities that it had and the richness that was available there to others. So that's kind of where I come from, and I'm just looking forward to getting, as Carlin said, on the learning curve here in Concord, because I think Concord has a similar posture of tremendous wealth, tremendous resources, and sometimes we have trouble with the diversity of our community and being welcome. So I'm on the learning curve along with Carlin and some of the rest of us are here on this board, but I think I have some of the background to help guide me there. So thanks.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you, Dean.
Drew, and as you can see, I have also all the affordances of privilege that one can have as a cisgendered, Harvard-educated white man. But my parents raised me from a pretty young age to care about community and giving back. They met as Vista volunteers in San Antonio, Texas, and basically from the moment I was born taught us that you weren't doing enough unless you were giving back to your community. So here I am. I've also spent my life in education, first in small ways of running a tutoring company and doing an assortment of volunteer work in Cambridge and the surrounding area, running volunteer tutoring programs in local public schools as well as the nearby juvenile prison, which has since closed. And then after doing that for about a decade, I thought to myself, I think I can use artificial intelligence to scale up what I do and reach a heck of a lot more people. And turns out that was a lot harder than expected, but also way more impactful. And I spent the last 10 years of my career up until now one, realizing that I shouldn't be scaling myself up. I should be looking for the amazing practitioners, researchers, and leaders who frankly, are doing the real work on the ground and help enable them. And I've had the good fortune of really just learning a ton. And also as a CEO of a tech company with a lot of really passionate people who care about social impact and social justice, in 2020 when George Floyd is murdered and, storming the Capitol, we had a lot of people that were eager to, one, do the work inside the company and ideally help spread the gospel of inclusivity, I should say. And we did a heck of a lot of it. And now I am eager to once again contract my focus, and instead of trying to help millions of people do the work and make an impact as close to home as humanly possible. And I'm also really glad that we're having this discussion, because each time we've had a debate, it's been 90 seconds on this topic, and I think it deserves even more than 90 minutes. But yeah, this is just the beginning. Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you, and thank you all for those really, I think, useful opening remarks. Let's jump in to, I guess, what we can generally call your chance to talk about your relationship with this thing called DEI. I'll read a couple of prompts. There's probably one that I'd like you to actually take literally, and speak to that one, and then the others, whatever makes sense for you. So, again, hearkening back to that, we talk about DEI a lot, and especially these days, we talk about it inside some constructs that have been built to sort of keep us trapped in argument. So I'd like to give you a chance to talk about DEI, and again, not as a challenge. I really want folks to, I know you're in front of a bunch of people and you're on mic and it's being recorded, but don't feel like you have to nail it, or get it right, and don't allow yourself to trip into some performance that's not going to be useful. Just be real about it. So I'd love to give you a chance to actually talk about what the D and the E and the I actually mean for you. How do we define those terms in a way that we can all work around them? Given the times we live in, I'd love to hear you talk about what does it mean to be anti-DEI? We hear that so much. And especially if you encounter people, who do sort of espouse that supposed position, what do you do? How do you deal with somebody who is bold enough, brave enough, honest enough, whatever to say, I'm against DEI. What does that even mean to you? We can start there. And again, every question I ask is for everybody. I'll try to keep you within 2-3 minutes, once you start talking. But feel free to jump in. We can go down the line, or anybody who's ready to jump in can start.
I'll jump in on the diversity question, because I think it's fundamental to the role of the housing authority. In Concord and in every town in Massachusetts that has a housing authority, the reason for the need for the housing authority is to have some diversity of income within each town. If you didn't have the opportunity to have housing available to people at a level that they can afford regardless of their income, you wouldn't have, in a town like Concord, you wouldn't have any people making less than 2 times the area median income. That's the way the real estate market works. So I always start with diversity must include economic income status as well, and that often correlates, but not always correlates, with other markers, but it's got to be part of any attempt to define diversity or relate to diversity.
Okay. Yes, please.
I'll take letter I for inclusion, because he took D. Now, inclusion, that's one thing that I like to focus on, is making sure everyone feels included as part of the discussion for town meeting. I'll use that framework. And to me, inclusion includes and focuses primarily on accessibility. Physical accessibility, can you get to the place? Do you feel comfortable sitting where you are? Can you hear? Can you see what needs to be done? But also digital accessibility. Can you read the materials? Do they have them available to you? Are you going to get the briefing book at home in time? That sort of thing. So for me, inclusion focuses on accessibility to the materials, as well as feeling you're part of town meeting so that we get more people coming to town meeting and participating in it meaningfully.
I can build on that one, Carlin, too. Also, I love the sense, particularly sometimes in this work, I think people can feel like they're going to get it wrong. Carlos, you said that earlier. And I think one of the, slant-wise looking at inclusion is also calling people in rather than calling people out. I think sometimes we have, and we've all done it, heard someone say a perspective that we don't agree with and had a visceral reaction against. And how can we, pause our initial reaction and stay curious with whatever somebody's perspective is, whether they have the same color skin or not. I think that is one of the sensitive things that can make for a more constructive conversation in town in particular. So inclusion isn't necessarily race or gender or ethnicity or religious creed, but also just, hey, what's the inner workings of someone's mind? And if I've learned one thing, it's that I know nothing. I know absolutely nothing. And if I come at human beings with that perspective, I am prone to learn a heck of a lot.
I can.
I'd like to take take up inclusion up another level.
Bring it.
Because I believe that it involves celebrating difference. It involves being willing and able to recognize that someone has other different cultural norms, a different way of being. They may eat different foods, and that is something to celebrate. You can sit at the same table and take in something that you haven't before, and it's burning your mouth, and you're just about to die, but you go, okay, this could be good for you. You must enjoy this. I am dying here. I need water. No, I really think that we have a fabulous tapestry here that allows us a richness if we're only open to it. And that's what inclusion to me really brings to the party, is being able to, as Drew was saying, understand another person, but really just celebrate that person's difference. And that's important. That's an important piece.
Thank you.
I agree with all of what has been said, and I think my training in DEI is it's multi-layered, and the term is so multifaceted. And I think at the personal level, the training told me that we have to start from being able to see each other as human and see each other's humanity and have empathy for different contexts and experiences. And if you can start there, you have to sort of be trained to tune out bias that has been surrounded, that basically surrounds us in terms of our culture. Starting at the personal level, the ability to see humanity, and I think that's something that serves us all as we're trying to solve problems. And then, one of the things that's been really interesting to me to learn is that the language we use really matters here. And when we're in a cultural moment, I think we'll talk more about this, we're in a cultural moment where the language causes people to scurry for their corners. And one thing we have to do with DEI is figure out how to bring more people into the essence of it. And I think one of the things that I think about for our town and for our country is that our ability to see people's humanity and our ability to bring talent off the sidelines that has not been noticed or paid attention to or given the resources that are needed to thrive, that is a strategic value of what we're talking about here. And it's not always just about the identity piece of the puzzle or the other things that people tend to run away from. It's really about how we bring more people into the process of problem solving and making our country and our town better.
Wonderful. Thank you all. What have been and are your technical and experiential sources of understanding and practice regarding DEI? And here I'm talking about books, classes, where are you getting the spirit and letter of what this thing's supposed to be? Acknowledging that it can be all over the place, right? So again, don't feel like you need the right answer. And what do you feel you have a good grasp of? What do you know that you don't know? And how do you go about being open to what you don't know, and then filling those gaps regarding DEI practice?
I can jump in to start that one. Talked about my career of service to others and to humanity, and that's been a good part of the training ground, but spending 10 years at New Profit, which is the organization here in Boston that supports entrepreneurs who have really been shut out of resources and philanthropy, that was a majority-minority organization led by a person of color, and that was part of my learning journey. That was a place where I was deeply trained over many, many years based on a formula for DEI or a training structure for DEI, and that was a incredibly formative experience for me because of how uncomfortable I had to be throughout that process. And often when we would do training sessions, the white men who held power in the room, like I did because I was on the executive team, were used as examples of kind of how we need to get beyond some of the constructs that exist in our country and just are traditionally the way they are. And I had to get past discomfort. It took me so long. I just could never understand why some of the hard questions were being asked of me, but eventually I saw that this was necessary for people to see that I was trying to be on equal footing and that there was humanity to be shared. So incredibly formative experience for me, and I'd say we spent about 5 years in regular and consistent training around DEI. And I think there's the knowns, and then you said, what do we not know yet? I think the area where I want to, particularly when we talk about what we're doing here and what we're trying to do in our town, there is a systemic approach that's needed to really make these things work and to really make people feel included, like they're part of a community, welcome people in. And it's so complex to figure out how to bring all those pieces of the puzzle together. But I see here momentum in the right direction from town leadership. I see the commission itself taking steps to really lean into the systemic nature of some of the complex issues we're trying to face. So that is what I really want to focus on, not just one piece of the puzzle here or there, but how we do the things we need to do across this town, including addressing the cost of living, which I hope we will talk about, to make this welcoming beyond just the rhetoric that we're able to put out into the world about that.
Great, thank you.
Oh, I can dive in. I won't give like the litany, but I'll say, you know, we've done a bunch of like, at my company, we did a bunch of trainings and I got the chance to meet a lot of people. And the number one most impactful thing we ever did, in my experience, was we practiced. We broke into small groups and practiced micro and macro aggressions, and we role played. You know, someone would be the aggressor, someone would be the victim or the recipient, and someone would be the active bystander. And I, in a fascinating way, even when we knew we were role playing, you have like the dump of endorphins, and it is a really powerful exercise to try on all the different roles. I will say that in my experience, that is the type of thing that opened my eyes the most, and hopefully I get a chance to do it again, maybe even in town. I think it would be really, really wonderful.
So I'm going to come at this from a slightly different perspective. In my career, I was a software development manager, which meant that I had to hire people who had certain skill sets. And when you're looking for people who have certain skill sets in a market that is extremely tense and you can't find people, you'll hire whoever has the right skills. And that meant we had a very diverse and very talented team here in Waltham, and then I grew other teams as my career went along. They included Russians, Chinese, Koreans. Anybody who could code was okay with me. So that also meant that we had a really wide range of cultural experience right within these teams. And people had to get along. There was just no way not to. And as a manager, I had to be open to, I need to take a vacation for a month to go visit my family in China. I had to go to India when we were outsourcing to India. I had to go to India and meet teams out there. I'll tell you one quick story. When I went there, shocking to me. So I was supposed to meet a team of about 15 people. It was a mix of women and men. And they were going to meet, we were going to meet in a conference room. And there was a sort of semicircular arrangement of chairs. And I walked in to give a quick presentation about a product that we were building as a team. And when I walked in, all the women stood up and literally walked out of the room. All the men took all the chairs, and then the women stood in the back. And I said, "What was that? What are you doing?" "Well, they're the men. They get to sit in the chairs." So these kinds of cultural kind of you're going in different directions. We're just part and parcel of my learning experience as I had to work with people who had skills that I needed, but they also had individual cultural experiences that were so diverse from mine that I really need to stretch and work with all of them. So that's kind of learning by doing is really my life there. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I learned by travel. When you're in the majority, you take much for granted. But when you travel to another country, and I went to Japan and Korea recently, you're very much in the minority. And I found out that every culture has a lot of different aspects of it. So trying to understand another person's perspective, when you can't read the language, you can't understand what's going on, you're relying on Google Translate, really is a humbling experience. But it's worthwhile, because now when I come home, I can watch those Korean dramas with the subtitles, and I can actually understand what that is going on, because I understand some of the norms that I didn't know before I started doing the traveling. Going to South Africa was also another interesting experience. When we were in a gated community, we were one of the few whites allowed in there, and it was a very noticeable experience in that respect. So travel has helped me to understand more about the cultural differences. So that's been part of my DEI experience.
Thank you.
Just briefly, I think my first real serious exposure was back in the early 2000s, and at that time it was referred to as equal opportunity. I don't believe DEI was in the nomenclature, or at least not the agency that I was working at. And the usual trainings, I found what was most helpful, though, was years later, as Drew mentioned, some of these smaller group workshops where we broke down the folks in our office and made up new teams to try to figure out a problem. And all of a sudden, here I was teamed with, I was the oldest white male in the office, teamed with a young Puerto Rican woman who was far ahead of the rest of the people on the team. And I hadn't seen her that way until that day that we had that joint exercise. And then I saw her potential in a completely different light. So that's the long way around of getting to, you need to be one-on-one with people that you wouldn't otherwise work with sometimes to get the messages to sink in.
Thank you all for your rich responses, and I'm trying to, I can't help but be empathic to the folks sitting out here. I hope you're taking notes for things you want to come back to, because so much is coming out from this side when it's time for you all to ask some questions. Going to ask a question about, or give you an opportunity to talk about what I call DEI allyship, where allyship sort of made simple is, your struggle is my struggle. If you're in trouble, I'm going to show up for you, just like I hope you would show up for me. I'm going to read you something called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Ally Pact, and then ask you a question sort of based on it. So, my Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Ally Pact. I know I have blocked spots, the inability to see that what I'm doing might be harmful to someone. I know I have tough spots, the natural resistance to input that suggests my behavior conflicts with my intentions. I know I have blank spots, a lack of data and knowledge about crucial differences in social advantages and disadvantages between myself and others. And I know I have work to do. I promise to do the work I need to do to see my biases, spare you my defensiveness, and educate myself in order to be the most effective teacher, student, parent, family member, town leader, etc. I can be. I hope you will always feel entitled to let me know if my blocked, tough, or blank spots ever cause you to feel anything less than respected, included, and well served by me. I promise to always do my best to receive your notice of my mistakes with humility and gratitude. So the first part of my invitation is, what do you think of that, as an agreement? The second part is, how might you act on it? And here I'll say that in my opportunities to be in the inner workings of Concord leadership, I have seen a lot of wonderful work. but I tend to be transparent and candid. I've also seen town leaders behave in ways that I would say we should help with that, including how we speak to one another. And on occasion, most recently, I've seen someone try to sort of say something about that, and as a town leader. And I wonder how important you think that is to find a way to model that we're willing to hold each other accountable for actually doing the things we say we're going to do. So your thoughts about the idea of an agreement, that we all sort of sign up for, and then how do we live it?
I can start there. What you're talking about, you can call it a pact or an agreement, but again, it's a human way of dealing with each other. And I will just use an example of this campaign. I just sat here and told you all that I had 10 years of intense training around DEI, and I was in that training with people of all different races, ethnicities, and backgrounds. And yet when I jumped into this campaign and quickly put together a website and tried to get my message out into the world about how I wanted to be that person, I wanted to reflect those values, I sat down with a person in this room who said, you have got something deeply wrong here in what you're trying to say to the world, and I need to ask you whether your values align with what I'm seeing here on paper. And this was like it was one of the first meetings I had on my campaign. And the discomfort of hearing someone say that to you when you're trying to do something like this is jarring. But I listened to that person, and what he said to me was, if you have these values, then you need to stand behind them, and you need to act on them, and you need to live them, and not just, kind of go with what you're hearing from others. And so that was just a really important moment for me in this effort, and I think it's what led me into my evolution, even in the 6-week sprint that we've been in, around what I believe a vibrant Concord looks like and how we get there. So, we have to be able to listen to each other on that front. We have to not get defensive. We have to be willing to respond when people are bringing these things to us. And that's a hard thing to do because it's an area of discomfort and an easy way to get defensive. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you.
I think everybody wants to be heard, and everybody needs to be heard. And it's difficult it can be difficult if you're a leader and people expect you to have the answers or make the final call on something. It may be difficult to say, I could make mistakes, I could get it wrong. I hope you'll point that out to me when that happens. And you still may decide that in spite of somebody pointing it out to you, it's your call, and that's the way you're going to stick to it. But hopefully you'll be wise enough and considerate enough to consider that somebody's not trying to take you down by disagreeing with you. They're trying to build a better solution together. And I think that's an attitude that I come to the job with, and that I hope people I work with will come to whatever task is at hand the same way.
Thank you.
You mentioned something about blind spots in your description, and that's what cued me up on this approach. We have blind spots, and we create those blind spots by erecting barriers. We send email messages, we send text messages, we might send a letter. We don't call people anymore. We don't really reach out and see them in person. And I found that when I feel like there's a blind spot going on, going out actually shaking hands or saying hello or reaching up and say, oh, you're Naomi. I've heard your name before. Tell me about yourself. That's how you meet new people. That's how you erase some of those, or at least lessen some of those blind spots, because you can say, there's another direction that I need to be looking for. So that's what I'm looking for. It's difficult to look for a blind spot, but when you see it, there are ways to overcome it.
Thank you.
I want to echo something that Sam said about a 6-week sprint. This has really been a growth opportunity that I did not expect from myself. I went into this campaign thinking, I know what I want to do. I know what I'm about here. And the amount of feedback that I've received over the course of this campaign has really been an opportunity for me to take in so many other voices within the community and given me pause to rethink, reassess, and then move forward by using the building blocks of the input I've received. So that has it has really been an eye-opener for me to just go through this campaign, and I guess I just want to thank the community for not holding back, not holding back. So there you go.
Thank you.
Amen to that, Dean. Actually, Carlos, what you talked about, when someone is willing to share their lived experience of being hurt in some way or ignored or feel in many ways being vulnerable, it is very rarely for that person's benefit. They are sharing that for our benefit so that we can grow, Dean.
Yes, yes, sir.
And I think to maybe recognize that the gift being given of diversity is one for our sake. I think it also holds true for, I think, our posture in many cases to the Metco community in town, where I think some people have the impression that we're giving them the gift of our school system. But frankly, we're a diversity desert, and they are giving us and our children the gift of perspective about life that they are not able to get in Concord otherwise. And so just typically the best thing I like to do is pause and say, I do not know what it's like to walk a mile in your shoes, and nor will I ever know. But I know what it feels like to feel sadness or hurt or ignored or any litany of just basic human emotions. And I think acknowledging those things are the things that bring us together as people, and then getting real curious about how your lived experience might be different than mine. That's a real opportunity. And I think we have that opportunity. I actually think there's an incredible gift we've been given in town by the incidents of hate and bias reporting, showing us that we are experiencing a disproportionate number of these things. In a weird way, this is something worth celebrating, because only by seeing the data and the inarguable truth, like no one can argue that these numbers are the way they are, is giving us the chance to grapple with it and do something about it. And even though they're not the numbers we want, they're the numbers we have. And I've heard many people say things like, this is not the Concord that we stand for or we believe in, these are not our values, but frankly, they are. They're the reality. And the beautiful thing is they don't have to remain that way. So I think that we have a great chance, and it gives me a lot of hope. So thanks.
Thank you all for the super rich and candid and humble responses you've made. The last remark actually is a nice segue to moving into a few issues. And I'll read a prompt about one of the challenges we're facing, and give, again, anybody who wants to jump in a couple minutes to do so. Having to do with hate crimes and accountability. As probably most people in the room know, the DA office data showed Concord as #1 for hate and bias complaints in Middlesex County. In the last 6 months, although we were about 1% of the country's population, we have accounted for 100% of the reported incidents in the DA's office. There is a working group engaged in Herculean efforts to develop a hate and social bias reporting system. Collecting data, even if done perfectly, it just gives us information, though.
Yes.
Right? So let's assume we're going to come up with something wonderful, and we're going to have hard data. What else needs to be done?
I think first we have to agree on the problem, or maybe an assortment of problems. And that might be the hardest part of the conversation, but I think it's 99% of the effort. Because if we're not all looking at the problem the same way, we're hard pressed to solve it correctly. And during the course of this campaign, look, I got into this campaign because primarily of this issue. I want to create a better conditions in the schools for my own children. I'm not Jewish, but they are, and the ADL complaint certainly opened my eyes. And as I've gone through the campaign, I've met dozens of families, and I can assure you that the iceberg is a lot deeper than I initially thought. And many of these people don't necessarily feel safe or comfortable sharing publicly. And because we have not created the conditions to welcome their vulnerability, their stories, or maybe even probably shown the willingness to listen. But I do think there's a tremendous opportunity if we can come together, and we've begun to take steps. I think the select board has done a good job with the Jewish families in town, and that was a great opening. In many cases, Jewish families are still privileged in some senses. Even though anti-Semitism is real, there are other privileges we have, and that make it maybe easier for us to share things publicly than some other constituents in town. And so I think my hope, Carlos, is that we can create the conditions not to air the dirty laundry, but to air the shared humanity of our town in a way that frankly hasn't happened for a long, long time here. But we do have a tremendous history of being able to break down these barriers and have transcendental conversations, if you will. And I also think to some degree, I've even changed my perspective on it, because I was like, oh, I'm doing this for the kids. But I actually think there's a way that they can model what these conversations look like better than we can. I am a tremendous believer in the next generation. And so, frankly, it's not even the voting population, it's all of us. And this is not an issue that any elected official is solving. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'll shut the hell up.
Thank you. Others?
I'm going to bring the conversation back a little bit to the reporting system that you alluded to, and what one of the values is that it would have for us. And that is for if we can successfully, and as you said, perfectly implement such a system, it would give us a sense of the scale of the problem. Right now, we have, some really loud complaints that bubble all the way out to the Boston Globe or beyond, and that's not a good look. But is that representative of the breadth of the problem? So that something where we can collect and get some metrics will help us really understand how deep. Now, Drew says it's an iceberg and a lot of it is underwater, and we need to see that. And the only way to see that is if such a reporting system provides avenues that will allow people to be comfortable in a lot of different contexts. And it may not be that people want to report directly to a governmental thing, a governmental agency, a governmental website. They may want to go to some other community. They may want to do that in their faith community. They may want to do that through a non-governmental group who has some outreach capacity. And so we need to find ways to partner with other entities within the community if there's going to be a fulsome understanding of how broad this is. So that's just my sense of that.
Thank you.
I'm going to fall back on my law training. I'm an attorney, so I'm always interested in finding out, when you collect data, how are you going to use the data? How are you going to use it against people? How are you going to use it in favor of something? So I must admit, the hate and bias group is one of the groups in town I've not been watching carefully, but I will. So interested to see how the data will be reported, what data are being collected, and how they intend to be used. Because what's the point of collecting data unless you intend to use it for some purpose? And I don't know what those purposes are.
Thank you.
I'm going to piggyback on our brief conversation before the forum started, and to add to what you're saying, Carlin, I think any kind of reporting system must have some sort of output reporting. It can't be a black box into which things go in and nothing ever comes out. And if you can't name names, fine, name counts. Name something. You know, the Concord Bridge manages to print a police blotter that is interesting, yet doesn't trample on people's rights, but it lets you know some of the things that are going on that the police get involved with. Some of them are funny, some of them are heartwarming, some of them are heart-wrenching. But for any kind of reporting system, if you never get an output out of it, some kind of report, it won't be trusted. No one will use it, and then you defeated the purpose, I think.
Thank you.
So I think the bias and hate reporting working group is part of a constellation of things that we could all point at that feel like some level of progress for this town. The work that the select board has done around IRA has been mentioned, the hate and bias reporting working group, the work of the commission, the work of private citizens in this town to raise up a fuller version of our history as a town. Those things are all really good things, and I think they matter. The harder work, from my point of view, is ahead, and that's not what we can do from the committee level and the leadership level, but how we turn this towards what do we do from the ground up here, and that sort of leads me to the point about civic virtue. I don't think we as leaders necessarily have been doing a great job modeling civic virtue for our kids, and we see this happening on committees, we see this happening in other places. And I think what it takes is a real whole community mobilization to start kids early on understanding how to relate to each other, how to be kind to each other, how to understand differences between each other, how to basically come from that level up as opposed to only trying to think about how we come from the leadership level down. And it used to be that we sort of thought of this only in terms of what we could deliver to them in the classroom, but this is really about how we engage with people with young people in the community, what opportunities we provide them to be involved in what we call our direct democracy. I think the other thing that is so critically important, and this has just become the sort of core, the center of my campaign, is that we've got to make a decision to open up the opportunity to participate in our town to broader representation. Because until we do that, people just are tending to not see themselves reflected in all of this action that we're trying to take. And that, I think, is a barrier to what we might call the systemic change that we all want to see to make this a more welcoming and vibrant town.
Thank you.
Can I ask Sam a question based
Please.
on what he said
Yes.
about making people feel like they're more willing to participate in town? One of the jobs of the role of town moderator is to pick people who are going to be serving on the finance committee. How do you pick people to be on the finance committee? One of the classic ways is a type of diversity, which precinct you live in. Now, Sam, here's what a question. I know that I live north of Route 2, and you live south of Route 2. Does it matter to you where people live in town as people who would be candidates for me to select on the finance committee?
Does it matter to me where people live in town in terms of representation on the finance committee? I wouldn't necessarily look at it that way, but I do think perhaps what you're pointing out is that we do have some socioeconomic, for example, diversity in this town. And could we be looking at that as an angle on what the finance committee's work is doing? I'm not sure that I would go immediately to how to pick from a precinct versus the other, but there are certainly ways. I mean, I think that, you know, the line about me throughout this campaign is that I haven't served on enough committees and I haven't been here long enough. And I think that's just, that is an example of how leadership is shaped in this town that is very, very much in contrast to all of the things we're trying to talk about here with DEI. And so we've got to make a decision as a community that we're going to change that, or else all we're doing is a lot of work in various different places that are running into barriers for real change. So I think that would be my answer to the question.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for the answer. It's 6:37. I'm going to ask one more question that's on my sheet, and then I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to all of you. The redevelopment of MCI Concord is a rare opportunity. There are competing visions of how to capitalize on this opportunity. One, roughly favoring commercial office parks to shield residential areas, and another pushing for vibrant mixed-use recreation. If forced to choose between a project that maximizes commercial tax revenue to lower the residential burden and a project that prioritizes high density, truly affordable housing for the vulnerable residents you mentioned, or for vulnerable residents, which would you choose? And if you're smart enough to not let me trap you in a binary, what do you think is the best use of this opportunity?
Well, I'm going to jump right on that one.
That's a gimme for him. Come on now.
That's a gimme. The answer is housing, and lots of it, and diverse income eligible housing. So I would not want to see 100% affordable. I wouldn't want to see 100% luxury either. It's got to be some blend. The state typically requires 25% affordable in a 40B project. I'll bet that with some creativity, we could get something on the order of 30% of 80% of AMI affordable and some other portion of so-called workforce affordable, so that we don't end up with just $5,000 a month rent or $1,000 a month rent and nothing in between. There's going to be a broad spectrum. If there is still room for commercial, fine, but that's not my priority.
Yeah, and I would invite folks to sort of add the image challenge of those folks who live over there, and what they can afford and not, versus the rest of us who live over here and what we can afford. How do you manage that?
I mean, ideally, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference without looking a little bit closer. If the person living in an affordable housing situation pays $1,000 a month in rent because that's what their income as an artist or a poet enables them to pay, they may very well have a PhD. They may have attended a Ivy League college and they just don't have the income right now. Somebody else, who knows, maybe they're working at some sort of mid-level job, either early career or some other source of income that they can afford $3,000 or $4,000 a month in rent. But if you put those two people next to each other, absent the paint spots from the studio, you wouldn't be able to tell one from the other. That's what I want to see.
Thank you.
I'll take a crack at this. It was a question that the league asked us to put in the, or the bridge asked us to put in the bridge. I see Route 2 as basically the only viable place where someone could commute to Concord on. And if we redevelop the Rotary, that will make that a possible place that people could commute to. So along the Route 2 corridor, I would see possibly some sort of commercial and office type spaces. And that would provide a certain barrier or buffer between there and the back area of that 34 acres of developable land over there. And within that space, you could get housing at a density of about 7 to 10 units per acre, and it would be a mix of affordable, market rate, and age restricted. There should be some amount of capacity for community engagement, walkability, et cetera. Now, one of the problems we face if we put too many houses over there is going to be traffic and problems that are driven down Commonwealth and into West Concord. The road network is unable to sustain a high number of traffic trips per day that might come out of a very dense residential area. One thing I do want to point out is that Concord has had a very nice triangular slice of land that was gifted to us by the state, and we've been unable to find a way to develop that into affordable housing for the last 6 years or 7 years now. So getting this built out is going to be a long arc. It's going to take a long time.
Thank you.
I'll just weigh in. I tend to, at this point in the campaign, not love that we sort of talk about MCI as the thing that's going to move the other thing. I think the way I look at it is, can we consider MCI as part of an arc of opportunity that goes through West Concord, down West Concord Main Street? And I think you know, it's hard. The cost of living issue here is so complex and difficult that we're going to have to get really creative about it. And I think that the most powerful idea that I've heard in this campaign that I've tried to get myself up to speed on is the idea of thinking about MCI as part of a transit-oriented development opportunity. Dean says Route 2 is the only way that we can get people into town. I mean, we're a small town that has 2 train stops in it, and I think that's an asset and a gift that we need to really think seriously about how we can leverage even better. And so if you think of MCI as part of the arc of development around a transit point, you can think about different types of living opportunities for people who are from different socioeconomic groups. You can think about the idea that we might be able to attract more employers here to create more jobs and create more revenue. And I think, you know, you can also talk about the conservation angles on this and how we can grow without bringing too many more cars into our town. And so I would love for us to have vision at that level rather than thinking about MCI as the key that we're going to turn to try to solve this problem or that. And again, it's very complex, but I think there are some huge opportunities out there and assets that we can leverage to make the most of the broad set of opportunities that we have right now.
All right, I would love to, unless anybody else wants to say anything, but okay. I'd love to get out of the way and give you a chance to engage directly with your constituents. I understand there are a couple of roving microphones out there, and I want to pause because I didn't ask, how are we making sure that we give the folks who are online a chance to jump in as well? We have a, okay. In that case, anyone who is ready, please raise up a hand, we'll get you a microphone. A couple of hands up, okay.
Hi, Paul Bohm. Thank you for the discussion. Very rich. I'm sure everybody in this room, everybody listening is looking forward to the goal of a welcoming and a safe community. Notice I didn't mention any of the DEI words, welcoming and safe. In your various roles, how would you measure progress? Both using kind of soft metrics, hard metrics, in process, end of process. In your various roles, how would you know if we're making progress towards that goal of a welcoming and safe community?
Let me start. Paul, I have no idea how I'm going to measure that role in the context of being a town moderator. All I know is I want to make sure everyone has a fair chance to speak at that microphone, and they don't speak more than 2 minutes, because I will turn their microphone off to give the next person a fair chance. So that's what I see.
And Paul, at the quantitative level, we have been losing diversity in our town over the last couple of years, and that is an actual data point that should concern us all. So that's one thing that I think we have to think about. I'm talking there about racial diversity in particular, but I think at the qualitative level, I would love to be able to go through a process like this and not have to hear from people from all different backgrounds, racial, interfaith, who don't feel comfortable in the town. So if I could hear that less, I've heard that too much in this campaign, that would feel like one way to measure how we are getting out of this moment that we've come in. And I think the bias and hate reporting system that you have been a leader in helping set up is another place where we need to watch and see. I mean, Middlesex County is counting us as the absolute single locus point of hate and bias reporting, and we have got to get out of that, from under that. I mean, that is not a good look for us because it makes people not want to move here and help us do the other things that we want to do to be a more welcoming and vibrant town.
I think you're onto something, Sam. I think the truth is the stories multiplied by the data, and you need the qualitative and the quantitative to really nail it down. I think it's a can of worms in the schools, but in some senses easier to measure because we have things like surveys that go out to the families. We have test scores and achievement gaps that we can close measurably. And certainly we hear from people in the school system as well. And we know that I think the majority of those incidents reported are coming from the school system, which to me is also heartening because it means that people are willing to speak out. Look, it happens in other communities too. The willingness to report something is actually a good sign that people feel that something will come of it. I think it's the beholden on us to do something about it, but I do think it has to be the qualitative and the quantitative, as you said, Sam. Thanks.
I appreciate you bringing up the achievement gap issue. That is absolutely one of the pieces of data that we need to focus on as a whole community, not just in the schools committee, but as a whole community.
Heck yeah.
I'm going to sort of put a finer point on the achievement gap problem. It's not a select board issue, but acting out and, you know, becoming obstreperous in school or otherwise not delivering the need of a achievement gap is often a function, and my wife is a tutor of dyslexic children, is often a function of a literacy gap. If you aren't keeping up on at the literacy level that you need to be at, you start to do things, and it becomes a cycle.
Yes.
And so addressing a literacy gap is really something that we should be looking at pretty closely. That's just something that I feel that because my wife does individual tutoring with dyslexic kids, and they fall behind, and they act out, and they become problems in the school. And she does what she can to bring them up to speed and get them there. So, yeah, I see literacy as a key driver of achievement gaps generally, and of people being, you know, kind of pushed aside in the system. That's
Great.
just,
Thank you.
yep.
Someone's ready over here?
Yeah, Craig Ommler, 27 Lang Street, and the achievement gap's a good example of what I'm thinking about, because I was very active volunteer with Dr. Williams' campaign, and the achievement gap was something that I would talk about, you know, to people, and I was stunned. And I'm new to Concord, 3 years, that people would say, "Well, can't we talk about the good things? Why are you being so divisive? We want a civil conversation." And I can't tell you how many times Concord to me seems like some other world unto itself of excessive politeness, to the extent, if you should call it politeness, I think it's rude actually, that of a civil incivility. That when you speak, you're supposed to speak in a certain way for a certain length of time and a certain amount of emotion in your voice, all of that. And I'd like to know how you, going forward, any of you, when you're leading civic meetings, how you can go about encouraging truth-telling while also maintaining a civil discourse. I don't think that are opposed, but I would like to see, how would you do that?
I've actually done that in the Housing Authority. From time to time, we have to update policies that affect our residents. The most recent example was a change in the smoking policy. And my approach was to announce and make sure it was well communicated that we'd have a public meeting at which anyone could speak. We would listen to everyone, and the board would not vote to make a change until we had heard from everyone. And that's exactly what we did. And we did not hear the same desires from everyone, but we were able to listen, they were able to speak, and we were able to come up with a policy that if everyone wasn't thrilled with, they were at least accepting of it. So I think that's a micro example, but you need to give people a chance to speak. And if that means the meeting goes long, the meeting goes long. It's okay.
May I
That's
ask,
better.
how did we define everyone, and how did we know that we achieved that?
Well, that was a little bit easier for the Housing Authority because we know who lives in our units, or we think we do. I think for the town, you know, depending on the venue, everyone is probably everyone who can get there in person or on Zoom, recognizing that some people can't because either they're working at that time or there's something else going on. Notification in whatever means it takes to reach them is really the the best line to spread the word. And then it's up to them whether they are interested and want to participate or not. And I'm looking at you, I'm thinking, and you probably have to say, or you should say, invite them. I can't invite somebody if I don't have an email address for them, or a Twitter handle, or a telephone number. How else do I invite them?
Can I make?
So maybe that means that we need to be gathering those kinds of communication names along with the census, for example, so that we can find a way to reach them that is speaking the way that they communicate.
Stefan, can I make a public service announcement for the school committee, which I am not yet a part of, but has deliberately tried to arrange a series of public coffees and forums, both virtual and in person, to welcome the community voices in favor or opposed to certain policy decisions or whatever might be going on. I think that's one small step, but it's really hard, as you say, to get the word out. I mean, how many people in this room even have any inkling that's happening? Probably very few of you. So I think there's more ways to do this, but it's very hard to balance that with very busy schedules too. And so I think it just takes a tremendous effort to get the word out and to welcome people however they can. And I think it's beholden on us as elected officials to do the work and to meet the people in whatever venue, in their living room or in a coffee shop we possibly can, and bring those insights, stories, and perspectives back from the constituents. Yeah. Sam, I see you nodding.
We are lucky to have in this town people now who've stepped up in leadership who know that if you don't crack eggs and you don't keep issues visible, then often in our culture things revert to the norm. And I just don't believe we can let that happen here. You know, it's so easy in this cultural moment. You talked about the cultural moment around DEI. It is so easy to run to the corner or hide your head when these hard issues come up. And if we don't keep them visible, as I said, and if we're not willing to make people uncomfortable about these things, then that is exactly what will happen. People will duck and cover, and we won't deal with them. So, you know, whether that's how we handle meetings, whether it's, you know, what is in the paper, I mean, you can look at this from various different angles, but if we're not willing to engage intensely with those things, then I think we sort of know what will happen in a place like this, which is it will go back to what it was, and people will probably feel pretty comfortable with that, but that's not the town I think that we all in this room would say that we want.
Thanks. I'm going to take another question. There's one here and then over there.
Thank you. Andrea Fonserrada, I'm co-chair of the DEI Commission. I would like to know the 2 or 3 priorities you think the town should pursue in the next 2 years regarding DEI issues, and how you would move them forward from your role, if you want. Thank you.
Everybody clear on the
Can I
question?
start that? Within the town moderator role, we are exploring something that will enhance accessibility. That's remote participation. That is a legislative action that's pending before the general court right now. And Concord and Wayland are 2 of the towns that have voted in favor of basically being able to participate at town meetings from home, so you don't have to show up in person. There are some technical components of that are still being worked out. Legislation is being redrafted so that Concord may be considered as a pilot program. And what that means is something that I'm working with the other town moderators from Wayland and Weston, Concord, and a couple other towns to see if it's a reality, if it can work, and under what circumstances we can make it more accessible to the people who want to or can't really get to town meeting but want to stay at home or wherever they are to participate.
So I'll jump in here. One of the pieces of this puzzle is we've been talking across this table about hate and bias incidents, and I want to commend Paul on the work that the incident reporting team is working through. But I do think that the town has a responsibility for everyone that works for the town and also for every committee member who joins a committee, and that is that they need to have specific training that helps them to do their job better. Right now, the state requires anybody who's working on a committee to have open meeting law training. They have to have sexual harassment training. They have to have corruption training so that there's no quid pro quo or other corruption going on in our staff or in our committees. We could extend that to have some training that's added and broadens the trainings that we do. We could do bystander training. We could do cultural competency training. I do think the school committee is already engaging in that with school committee staff, with school staff, I mean. So I think we could broaden that to town committee work and town staff work. So there's a few things that we could do. And as one member of the select board, I would have to work with the rest of the membership to see if that's something that we would agree to.
On the training aspect, I think the most effective training that we could do is not how to get it right, but how to repair when we get it wrong. Right. Because if Michael and the committee were to say something that offended my Italian heritage and he didn't know, I could explain to him what that meant and how would he repair the situation. How would he be able to say, Drew, I didn't recognize that. I'm sorry, I truly mean it. And how can I make it right? And just sort of train ourselves in a very small scale restorative justice, I think is one of the best efforts we can make as a committee. And then I think the second one that I would probably strongly encourage, now it's not a policy I don't think we would make at the school committee level, but I do think active bystander training could be a real effective tool for students in the schools. It does not need to be mandatory, but I think enough students would eagerly participate that it could make a difference. That was, I had the good fortune of talking to a bunch of students in the high school, and they shared with me their perspective on the issue that is happening. And they said, it's a very small number of people who are causing these really disgusting issues, and we just ignore them. And I didn't say it in the moment. It only occurred to me later that you have the luxury of ignoring them. Not everyone has the same luxury, and if you see it, how can you be an ally? And that is a hard thing to do, and I think it takes practice. And I think there would be a lot of students who would be eager to learn that. So those are the two that I would come up with.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm going to be really quick
Yep, go ahead.
and say I'm going to take this opportunity to play the I don't know card, but I'm happy to discuss it with you or anyone else to help form thought and figure out what we should be working on.
Thank you for the candor.
Amen to
We have a
that.
question here.
Let me just answer that one if I could.
Oh, please, I'm sorry.
So there are the big things that need to be done over many years, addressing the cost of living, affordable housing. These are things that I think we have to look out a little bit about, and I think each of us has put out our theories on those things in different ways. And then there are the things that we need to do that I think are a little bit more in front of us and a little bit more immediate. One is we need to do the work and reflect a different story about Concord outward, so that people are not looking at us as the town that doesn't want people here or the town that can't seem to get over these challenges around racism and anti-Semitism. And I would just name a few things that I think fit into that broader category. One is I think we need to fund the commission's work, and we need to give you resources to move forward on what I think are really positive steps across a range of fronts to bring this town closer together. I think that we need to continue the work that's being done on the Heritage Trail and with Robin's House to show that we care about the broader story of Concord that needs to be told, and that we're not going to remain stuck in the tidy colonial story about revolution and transcendentalism. There's so much that's happened there that is just really enriching, I think, for our town. And then I think we've got to figure out how to show people that we can solve problems and treat each other kindly at the committee level, at the leadership level, in all places, so that people are not looking at this town as one that cannot get over these humps. Because I think we have the assets, we have the creativity, we have the people who care to do these things, and that's just such an important piece of this. We want people to look at this as a place where they want to be, not as a place where it would be some sacrifice to move here because they might not feel comfortable or safe or see themselves reflected in what this town is. So a little bit different than the kind of policy piece that you mentioned, but I think those are things that are right in front of us to do.
Thank you.
Michael Williams, question for you all, and Carlin, take it out of the town moderator, but think something that you look at this from the perspective of the town. In the reporting system that we're all looking toward to bring change, what gives the community the trust on the back end that things are going to come out better? What through this reporting system, each of you could comment on what you think brings the community the trust to rely on that as a tool that's going to make change and bring improvement. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go first, because I'd love going first. Concord Bridge. I've noted that there are so many issues that are reported in the Concord Bridge that are basically trusted. So whatever comes out of that working group, work with the bridge to inform every household, because that's how the bridge is distributed. So that is probably one of the best distribution mechanisms and one of the best mechanisms I can think of to generate trust in what happens. Let the bridge know what's going on.
That's good.
I'm going to take this from a slightly different perspective, Michael. On the trail, what I've heard many times is that committee work is an insular thing, and then when a committee finally comes to some final conclusion or report or whatever, it's sprung on the community and there's no feedback loop. There hasn't been a feedback loop that's adequate during the committee's work, and so people feel shut out. They just feel shut out of the entire process, and then the next thing you know, we're hearing that maybe there's a cell phone tower going into Rideout, or maybe there's a CPW is going to be, over on MCI's property. I'm sorry, not, So that's a piece of actual work on the ground that our committees need. We need to engender within our committees, is that as they're doing their work, we have to find ways to engage with the community and make sure that it's not a surprise. This just happened with the land use working group the other day. They're closing in on the end of phase 1 report, and an entire group of people showed up at one meeting to say, do not use this land for a purpose that you are putting in your report. We just heard about this. It's got to go off the table. But that only happened because word kind of got out that it was going to be in the report, and a lot of work had been done without any kind of feedback loop. So that's something that I think that we can, as a select board, work to engender within the committee work itself. As charges are read, as annual goals are set out, that this kind of community outreach feedback loop is created, and that should be something that helps with transparency and a welcoming community where you feel that you are heard. So,
I think that if we don't hold ourselves to a pretty formal structure for how we're going to report on these things, then the information will continue to get cloistered. I think we see that in too many places probably, and I think I would sort of have to understand from Paul's working group about how they think about that, but if we don't have milestones and we don't have formal structures for how the information needs to be shared with the community and receive feedback from the community, then again, it's another one of those things that I feel like it sort of it can disappear behind a wall based on legal issues. I mean, you can look at any number of different things here, and that means that we will not get anything out of it. So I have a sense that probably the working group has thought about this and has been trying to put together a real structure for that. I'm not up to speed on it, but I think that's really the only way that we make sure that action happens out of data.
Yeah, the wheels of government are deliberately slow, but it requires a steady drumbeat. I think it starts with empathy, and then is the steady drumbeat on the agendas. And Mark, you've done a great job, keeping the DEI on the agenda, keeping the ADL case on the agenda, whether there's something to be said or not, just as something for someone to hang a comment on. I think that is a big piece of it, Michael. And then if you want to know the values of the town or the schools, well, let's look at the budget, because where we're spending money is the greatest indication of what our values are. So, yeah.
Thank you. There's a question here.
It's a little quiet.
It's working, it's on.
It looks on, but it's a little quiet.
It's a little quiet, yeah. Let's try the other mic.
Battery's low.
Okay, I'll start again.
You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Do I have to start at the beginning? I'm Mary Hartman. I'm on the select board. I'm speaking only for myself. Thank you for this conversation. Very thoughtful answers. I want to go back to something that Stefan said, which I happen to agree with, which is if we want a diverse population, then we need economic diversity, and that begins with a diverse housing stock, right? So we want people with various economic means to be able to live comfortably in Concord. And I've also heard the cost of living come up, right? And when I hear cost of living, I think property taxes, which is something that... And so I'm wondering, what ideas do you have that would help people stay in Concord, given our property tax increases that we've seen? And what tools? We know people leave Concord because they can't afford the property tax. We know that. What tools do you see that we could use, or what other means could we do to rein in spending? Because you talked about budget as priorities. So I'd like to hear some practical ideas.
Let me start off this one. The Tax Relief Evaluation Task Force is going to be releasing its report very soon. It's given some preliminary information, but it's a very detailed report with a series of appendices and a series of recommendations. Step one, from my perspective, is to look at what the report recommendations say and see how it integrates. Because one thing I think we'll find is that people are leaving Concord not just because of taxes, but for a whole host of reasons.
To get to the point of why people are leaving Concord, people who have either very young children who are not in the school system yet, or don't have any children, when their children are starting to grow and they want to move from a small unit to something with a patch of grass, we become unaffordable. It's very hard to find that starter home. That is a problem. If you're living in an apartment and it works for you for a certain number of years, and then all of a sudden you just really need a little more space and you would really love a lawn, that's the place where people are sort of leaving Concord, we think. Back to the working group that's working on the tax report, I do think that there are a lot of tools in the toolkit that group has brought forward. Some of them take a lot longer to implement. They can't be something that's done. Some of them can't be done from an executive perspective from the select board. They require town meeting approval to do, but there is going to be a good blend of things that help renters, things that help seniors a little bit more, and we will still probably be using the RTE for several years to come. So from an affordability perspective, I think that that's here to stay, and I think we can make small adjustments, nip and tuck around the edges, but I think the RTE is a very good tool to serve some people. So that helps with the affordability, and that's just on the tax side. But affordability also has to do with availability of rentable or otherwise purchasable units that don't cost $1 million to $1.5 million. So I do think that some of the developments that are coming on, these 40B units, are going to be more affordable, and I think that's a good thing for the town, and I don't believe that it's going to have a significant impact on the school system, which is a fear that folks have, that it's going to be over 400 units of housing built with the 240Bs that are currently on the table. But those are going to be 41% one bedrooms, 49% two bedrooms. These are not going to be huge units that are full of school children that are going to bust our taxes. And then 10% three bedroom. So it is going to be very modest housing, and I think that's a good thing for creating economic diversity in the town, and that will, as a corollary, that will also probably create cultural and racial diversity at the same time.
Thank you.
I fear a little bit, Mary, that if we don't think really big on this issue, then we cannot bend the curve the way that you're talking about. And, you know, we could talk about one thing here and one thing there and one thing over here, and it doesn't seem to me like what we're looking at is really going to have an impact. So I tend to think again about this idea, for example, of transit-oriented development and how it could do several things at once that matter here: bring in more tourists and raise revenue for shops downtown, create more affordable housing options, potentially bring in employers who can be long-term job creators and revenue producers for the town, make sure that we're not overburdening infrastructure by bringing too many cars into town. So I want to believe that we have the creativity here to figure that out. I think the other thing that transit-oriented development could do for us is open up new opportunities to get state funding that we don't necessarily have at maximum right now. So that is where my mind tries to go, to be optimistic about how we actually handle a problem that's as hard as property tax growth. Balance, I think we need to aim for more balance between commercial and property tax revenue. That's one that feels really important to me. We have those opportunities in front of us. And then the last thing I'll say is just, I think the work of the land use working group and the planning group there, what Sven and his colleagues have tried to present to us is a way for us to do things that need to be done in the town without continuing to put liability onto homeowners to pay for all of them. So the idea that we can improve service, improve municipal buildings, all those things, and also potentially sell off some property that will lessen the load that the town is going to have to carry. Those are the types of, I think, creative things that would love to see more of. So.
Yeah, agreed. When it comes to the schools, I think the land use working group has got some good creative solutions that are going to prevent us from having to do some huge capital expenditures for the schools, which don't seem super popular right now. But I also think from the school perspective, you can achieve things like closing achievement gaps without necessarily spending a ton of money, but it's the where and the how. And sometimes it's making something available to all students. Sometimes it's investing resources, but in a hyper-targeted way. And other times, it's expanding the aperture and thinking more creatively about how you're using the things you've already got. And sometimes taking things that you might perceive as deficits and turning them into opportunities. Like a hour-and-a-half Metco bus ride could be a great opportunity to infuse that time of the day with education. Which is an idea that I cannot take credit for. It comes from Michelle, who's one of our Metco reps. And I think we should look at all of those options. And it doesn't necessarily have to bust the budget to do better in schools and to keep doing better. Yeah.
And I'll just add that I think people want to stay in Concord because that's where they've spent the last X number of years. That's where their churches, that's where their friends are, if their friends are still alive. Just dealing with reality here.
Yeah, that's a bit of a curveball.
Well, I'm not going to be around in 20 years. I recognize that. I think one of the issues that people face when they're ready to move out of their house is, where do I go next? And we don't have enough options for a single senior to go into a place where they have a range of independence and help as they lose their independence, short of the nursing home step. So Newbury Court fulfills that need if you have enough money. But for all of those who don't have the Newbury Court entry fee, we need something that's kind of Newbury Court light, maybe. I don't know. I think if I were at that point, I would say I want to stay in Concord, but I don't have to be in the same house. If I'm still close to my friends, close to my friends in government. So I think we need to rethink the types of housing that we allow and really maybe do some experimenting with not just ADUs on individual lots, but, and and not recreate Walden Woods or Walden Breezes, but something like that where there'd be smaller, less expensive place to live for older people who will need some services eventually.
Yeah, I think the bubble up of conversation around ADUs is really an example of creativity in the town. And there are cities like Portland and others that have shown, what are they calling, not a duplex, but a quadrex. But, you know, smaller opportunities, more dense areas to live, accessibility to services and transportation. That is an example of Concord being creative in a way that I think could serve some of the need that you're talking about.
Hi, I'm Deborah Dorfman on Lang Street. So, you know, we've been talking about earlier about the bias and hate reporting system that the committee, and I'm a committee member from the community, that we're working on. And, you know, a number of you said, well, we don't know where that information is going to go, what's going to happen. And so I ask you, what will you propose to do with the data and information that is gathered from the reporting system so that you can make, and in your respective roles, if you're elected, so that you can make Concord truly more inclusive and help reduce the very, very unfortunate high rates of incidents of hate and bias that we are hearing from the community. I do focus groups with the community and hear directly from them, and so I know that there's a lot of people really suffering because of these experiences, so I really want to hear from you, each one of you please, what you would propose to do to help make this more inclusive. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would go back to the formal structure for public, in some way public release of material that comes out of the group, and I think there are probably legal issues that have to be dealt with when we're talking about sensitive topics like this, but are we talking about a quarterly reporting function where there's community engagement that surrounds it? Are we talking about biannually? I'm not exactly sure, but my impulse here is to ask you all who've been in the commission what you think the answer is to make sure that these things don't become hidden and actually are part of community engagement. That's something I said that I just am not quite clear on, and it's partly because I haven't gotten fully up to speed on what the work is going on there, but that feels extremely important. If it's not formalized and it's not potentially passed as a policy or adopted, then it's just too easy to hide from what are hard stories often to deal with.
If I'm hearing the question properly, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, it goes something like, so we have the data, you get the data, you have your sphere of influence and service, how do you use the data to make things better?
That's correct. And, assuming that you're elected. Yes, that's precisely right. So what I want to hear is what you will do with the data. Assume that the data is there, the system is developed, it's adopted, so then you receive the data, it's not being hidden, it's out there. What are each one of you going to do, or what would you propose to do with that to make Concord more inclusive? That's what I'd like to know.
So I want to kind of go back to where I started earlier when I was being sort of a grandmotherly about protecting you from feeling like you have to have the answer to everything. You don't. But if it's a question that we understand and you feel it's a good question, what's your response? You know, even if it's I'm not sure.
I'm going to take a swipe at this. I'm trying to imagine what, quote, the data is going to look like. So since I don't know, I'm going to take a stab at it. I'm assuming that what we'll find is that we have categories of bias and incident types. And so if we see data that shows that we are experiencing a lot of anti-Semitism and not as much racism or, you know, inappropriate behavior relative to other cultural norms or religion, we would focus on what we see pulling, you know, the data showing us. We would focus on trying to work through anti-Semitic issues and just like the select board has already done. We would use the bully pulpit of that board to model the right behavior and to assert that Concord is against that sort of thing. So I'm just sort of trying to understand what we may see from an incident reporting system. I'm sure there will be numbers, but there will also be, more detail if somebody's narrative will come forward. So we'll have to find ways to categorize it and then focus on the types of things that we're seeing in the community, which may be, more of this and less of that, which helps us focus on what we think the problems are that are in front of us. I guess that's the best I can say from my point of view right now.
From the town moderator position, we probably won't use the data. We'll be more interested in when your person is standing at the microphone, whether they stay on topic, whether they start to expound on hate speech or some other issue that's not related to the warrant article that's being discussed, because I'm concerned about making sure people are on time and stay on topic, and that we all have an efficient town meeting as well as an effective town meeting. So I'm not sure I'll see the data, but I'll be looking for the language itself.
I think I would be interested in the data that affects our residents. And I assume that if someone reports an incident, that somewhere on the form they'll say, what is your address? So the data is there. If you can tell me that our residents were affected, I'm going to look for support for them. We have resident service coordinators who help residents with a number of issues that they're dealing with. And if someone has been a victim of, or recipient, whatever the terminology is, of a hateful incident, that's the person that I want to make sure they're getting some help, some extra help that they probably can't afford on their own. They don't have a psychologist on call. So I'd be interested in getting them help to deal with the situation that they find themselves in.
I guess Stefan's getting a little closer to concreteness with that, and it's do we first need to make a decision about whether there needs to be legal referral? Do we need to make a decision about whether it needs to be mental health referral? I mean, those things seem like they might have to be part of the equation, but again, dealing in hypotheticals. I mean, I think a little bit, and I'm going to forget the name of the cross-functional group that's bringing together the police chief and schools committee and select board. Do we lean on those folks to help us develop an answer or a way of addressing these things publicly? It's a very challenging thing to think about. But again, my impulse is to let the people who've been doing the work under the hood guide us a little bit on where those answers need to come and what they need to look like.
Yeah, I think if you've been doing, I think you said focus groups, Deborah, you've probably heard some of the similar stories that I've heard. And I think it is, one, to get the attention of leadership and acknowledge and empathize with that situation, whatever an individual is feeling. Oftentimes behind closed doors, that is probably not for public consumption yet. And then when there is trust and safety, I think there is an opportunity for some public sharing if we get there. But I think really the thing we can do most is fix our gaze on this problem and not flinch, and make it a priority meeting in and meeting out, and not try to solve the problems too quickly. And that might seem counterintuitive, but I do think there's rushing to solution can be sometimes part of the problem. I think we need to get a fulsome picture of it, and to the extent possible, share what that picture is with the rest of the town. And then I think we can start to solve some problems. And I don't know what those solutions will be. And maybe in some cases, simply doing the listening and the empathy and the acknowledgement and the public sharing might be enough. We don't know. We won't know until we do it.
Thank you. Yes, please.
So I'll go back to the beginning, where I don't think this question was really answered about how would you respond to a constituent, a supporter, a colleague who does not see the value in DEI work?
Tell me more.
Well, that's it.
Oh, I can tell you more. I'm happy to. So I'll jump into role, okay? I'm
Yes.
one of your neighbors. And if I'm going to be honest, I kind of like the way things are. And I like the way they've been, you know, for me and my family and generations of my family that have been here. And I know it's not going to be a popular thing to say. I know the times we live in, but like the aesthetic of this town means something to me. I like the houses in this town. I like the way they are. I like the land that's around the houses. I mean, if I wanted to be in a place where there was a range of different kinds of dwellings for different kinds of incomes, I guess I would move there, but I'm here because, and you can hate me if you want to and call me names, but that's what's comfortable for me. That's what I want for my kids. And I, like all of this talk and agitation about DEI and change and equity, and it's not what I signed up for. It's not what I'm here.
Master class.
That was good.
We all just sit here for a minute with that. I'll jump in and answer because that is not abstract at all. It is not abstract for people who live in this town to hear that type of thing. And the answer that I try to go to, which sort of goes back to what I said earlier, is how do we build, rather than give people a license to run back to the corner and hide their head from this, how do we bring more people into what we really think this is about? And for me, what I've been saying to people when I hear these very things is that Concord has an opportunity to grow that many of our neighboring towns across the Commonwealth, and small towns across America do not have. And we got to take that seriously. It's not going to happen if we're only looking for one type of person or one socioeconomic group or any sort of narrow answer. It's going to happen if we move towards more dynamism, more voices, more different types of opportunity in our town. That's what's going to be sustainable growth for us. And so, you know, I think it also ties to the argument I've been making about we need to bring more voices into the process and more talent into the process. Those things are all an answer to, I think, what people try to do to simplify this issue. And I just don't feel like the cultural moment that we're in is so frustrating in that sense because people shut off right away. And it is incumbent upon us who care about this issue to try to figure out a way to bring them back, because otherwise you have this divide that just stays forever and ever. It's not good for any of us.
The way your sample person characterized the way they like it here, they like it here because of its physical characteristics. They like 2-acre zoning, they like Monument Street's beauty, they like the school system the way it is, and our brand new schools. They moved here because of its real physical beauty. But I think within that, there's plenty of room for diversity. And unfortunately, that diversity is somewhat blocked by the economic barrier. And so we just need to talk about whether or not there's an opening in that conversation with the person that you're giving us. Is there an opening there for economic diversity within the community and keep the community kind of the community we know and still have a more economically diverse town? Who's going to educate your children? Somebody coming from many towns away, they're going to drive in from Lunenburg, or are they going to be someone who lives down the block from you? Who's going to be in your police department or your fire department? Are they going to be living in your town, or are they going to be driving in from Fitchburg? So we need economic diversity, and that would help to encourage a more community-oriented environment here in the town. And it doesn't necessarily mean that physical beauty that you bought your house to enjoy is going to go away. So.
Yeah, not to be difficult, but it's not just the aesthetics of the land and the buildings.
The people, yeah.
You know.
Oh, okay.
Tell me
So
more.
I won't you know where I'm going. I've had the great joy, and it actually is, I'm not a masochist, of doing a program called DEI Doubts.
Yes.
Where I work with whoever I'm working with to actually say to these folks who feel this way, come.
Yes.
Like, you're not going to be called names. Like,
Right.
you deserve to have your voice. We might try to change your mind. You can try to change ours, but we're not talking to each other.
Right.
So I guess to translate that into a question for you to consider, like, how do we do that? You know, knowing that there are folks in this town who sincerely, like, feel these things that I'm trying to give voice to here. How do we engage them, and what's the goal of the engagement?
In my experience, and I actually would love the opportunity to do that full dialogue with you at some point. I don't know if this is the time or the place. You can't change somebody's mind, but you can create the conditions that allows them to change their own mind, in my experience. And usually it's about asking, and oftentimes they will lay the groundwork for it, which is very interesting. And there are some people that are exceptionally good at this, and there's some really great science, the science of motivational inquiry, where I would say something like, on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 being no chance in hell, and 10 being absolutely let's welcome everybody, but where are you on the DEI spectrum? And if you said you were a 3, I would ask you to explain, hey, why didn't you say 2? And I would, and interestingly enough, oftentimes in my experience in knowing the science of this, the best way to end that conversation is with 0 resolution, which is just some questions. Hey, what would it take for you to shift your perspective on that, Carlos? I'd love to know, and maybe we can talk about it some other time. I think we have many different perspectives, but at the very least, you can be sure that people in town are thoughtful in this town, and there is no shortage of passion for people's perspectives. So they will lean into the conversation. I don't know if it'll end where you want it to, but in my experience, this is a very effective thing for dissolving systemic hatred, overcoming vaccine hesitancy, and I've had the luxury of meeting many people who do it well, and I am still yet a novice, but it is something I love leaning into and would be fun to practice together.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thoughts about how we engage with those folks constructively?
I think talking to them is one way to engage, probably the only way I can think of. And exploring with them a little more about their background and how they think they fit in. You might be surprised to find that some of the people who've been here a long time feel like they're losing their status in their own town. And if that's the case, why do they feel that way? How could they get it back? Or how could they move to feeling part of the new in crowd, whoever that is? Yeah, explore that with them. I think I agree with Dean, Drew, sorry. You're not going to bring everybody along, but as long as you're talking, you can still be the neighbors who say hi to each other. And that right there is a major accomplishment for some people.
All right, just a facilitation move. Is there any question that hasn't been asked that wants to be asked because we're getting near 8 o'clock? And of course, there'll be other opportunities, because what I'd like to do for our very generous panel is give each of you a chance to, let's frame it as sharing your takeaways from this experience with your constituents and neighbors. What do you take away from this time together with them? And how does it feed into the work that you want to do?
I can kick us off. I've said it during this campaign a lot. I feel very optimistic that these are things that we can handle and that there's a diverse and dynamic and growing community out ahead of us. But it's going to take ambition, and it's going to take focus, and it's going to take us supporting each other, particularly the folks who are in this room, part of the commission, on our Zoom call, the people who are tuning in because they care. And we do have to really take a systemic view on how this is going to happen for us. But I do think, I know that I can say with a lot of confidence that the town I want to live in, as I'm going to be here for another 30 years, is one that is economically dynamic, culturally diverse, loving of its history, but a fuller story of its history, and attractive to people who right now probably look at this town and say that's not really a place where I would want to see myself. So I also think that the one thing that we've been able to say to each other as a group of 5 candidates is that this has been a very civil race, and that matters too, and we're modeling to young people here what it means to be pluralistic and to take on a tough task like this and respect each other. So that has been a takeaway, I think, throughout this entire campaign, and certainly from all of the debates. So I appreciate all of you for that.
Thank you. We can go right down the table.
Beautiful.
I think I need to spend some quality time with Andrea so I can answer those questions that I took a pass on before. I also appreciate the time and effort that everyone has put into attending and working on these issues in your various communities, and I'm humble enough to say I don't have all the answers. I'm willing to look for them, and I welcome your help in finding answers and carrying on the conversation, the dialogue, preferably over a beer at the right tavern.
Nice plug, Stefan. Stepping out of my town moderator role, Concord is a great place if you can afford it. And that's the problem. We can't afford it. And I think that's causing a lot of the issues regarding the lack of diversity on many levels. So if I could do anything, and I'll see if there's something I can do, make it more affordable.
Thank you.
I'm just going to say that in this campaign, I have gone from here to here, and I need to go to there in this area. It has been a huge growth experience for me to engage with the people who are doing the work in this town, to make it a more welcoming community, to get us over the hurdles that we are all facing as we engage with some of the problems we see. And I know that I have a lot more work to do. So I just want you to all be aware that I'm willing to do the work, that I'm willing to engage, and I hope that the DEI Commission continues to do the work they're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, Dean. I mean, these issues are not going to be solved, period. Not in any of our lifetimes. But all we can do is do the work and get on the path and do it together. And I like the tenor that started here of calling each other in rather than calling each other out. But it gets a lot harder once we're on our committees and we have a lot of other competing priorities and tough budget decisions. And I think let's just remember this conversation because we're all going to need each other's help. No one committee is going to do this. No one person is going to do any of this. It's going to take everybody.
Thank you. Let me ask the commission folks, anything you need to say in terms of closing up? See heads nodding, no. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for guiding the discussion this evening and the courage and the willingness for our candidates to step forward and serve. So if you can just join me in with a round of applause of gratitude. And thank you so much for those of us who are here in the room and those of us who joined us online. Thank you for engaging with us this evening, and I hope you have a safe travels home. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a very different debate experience.